In my own words, Memoirs of a 20th Century Mystic by Elizabeth Clare Prophet. Chapter 33. I can't wait any longer. During my second year in Boston, I was working as a secretary for the president of a small insurance company, and I would spend my lunch hours trying to find Saint Germain. As part of my quest, I went to every second-hand bookstore I could find. I thought that if I could find some place where the books were sold, I could find the ballads, and then I could find Saint Germain. One day I went to a bookstore and they had the books. So I said to the owner, "Does anyone ever come in here to buy these books?" And he said, "Yes, there is one man, a doctor, and he comes in every so often and he buys up every book we have." Then I said, "I have to find this doctor." But the bookstore owner didn't know his name. So I said, "The next time he comes in, will you please get his name and phone number so I can contact him?" Every day I would go back and see if he had come in. All I needed to do was to stand at the door, and the owner would look at me and shake his head, and I would go on my way. Well, that method never proved to be the one that worked. I never did find this doctor through this means. Meanwhile, my mother had a close friend from Asbury Park whose name was Paula Grable. While I was away at school, my mother lent this woman one of my I Am books. When I found out, I said, "Mother, I can't believe you let go one of my I Am books and lent it without my permission. Get that book back from her or I might never say it again. I have to have that book." Paula read the book and decided that she would go to New York to find the contact of the I Am activity, because I had never been able to find it. So she went to New York, and while she was there, she had an appointment with a hairdresser she used to see there. As Paula was having her hair done, the hairdresser asked her what she was doing in New York. Paula thought to herself, what will you know about the Ascended Master's teachings? So she wasn't going to bring up the subject, but by and by, as the conversation went on, she finally decided to tell the hairdresser that she was in New York to find Saint Germain, the I Am activity, and anybody who knew about those teachings. It so happened that the hairdresser was a member of the Bridge to Freedom, which was another organization sponsored by the Ascended Masters. So through Paula Grable, I was put in touch with the Bridge to Freedom, the first Ascended Master organization I was ever in contact with. I wrote to them and they wrote back. I learned that there was an Ascended Master sanctuary in New York City that was associated with the Bridge to Freedom, and they invited me to visit. I was so excited about this. When the end of the week came and I finished work, I hopped on the train from Boston to New York. The head of that center was a strong woman of about 65 or 70. I told her that I had been a Christian Scientist and had studied the I Am books. So she sat me down and said to me, "Matter is real. Mary Baker Eddy is wrong. Matter is real." And she said a number of other things which she cited in the teachings of Mary Baker Eddy that she said were not true. Since I was 9, I had believed, as I had been taught, that matter was not real. So it was quite a shocking experience to be told this, and I remember distinctly in my heart how I gulped. I closed my eyes and it was almost like my internal being was shaking. I could feel in my being an involuntary trembling. It was not that I had fear, but that something at a subconscious level, at the very foundation of my being, a pillar of religious tenet was being shaken, when I was told that it was incorrect. In order to get through that day, I had to have absolute trust in God and in the ascended masters. I said in my heart, this must be a very key test. So I am going to set aside my religious beliefs and accept what this woman is telling me and see where it leads me. I spoke to God and I surrendered the whole teaching of Christian Science. If my entire lifetime of studies was of something that was not correct, then I was willing to surrender it. I don't know why I had the courage to do this. I have seldom seen other people who would. This was my first test. The second test was that she took an entire hour to tell me about this awful, awful man in Washington, D.C., who claimed to be a messenger. I had not heard of Mark Prophet, and I had no idea who she was talking about. With her European accent, she talked on, and I could not understand why she was carrying on about this terrible man. Why wasn't she telling me about the teachings of the Ascended Masters? But her conversation went in one ear and out the other. And I think that it was the blessing of my Christ self that it was just meaningless to me. And even when Mark Prophet came to Boston, I am not sure I made the connection that this was who she had been talking about. While I was at the center, I walked around the sanctuary and looked at the pictures and meditated upon the masters. I was in seventh heaven. For the first time, I saw El Moria's picture, and I saw pictures of other masters. At long last, after years of searching, I was finally in a sanctuary dedicated to the Ascended Masters. I learned that meetings were being held in downtown Boston on the second or third floor in a building off Commonwealth Avenue. This was a building I went by every day on my way to Boston University from my apartment on St. Stephen Street. Every single time I had walked past this building, a voice had said to me, "Go inside and see what's in there." But I would answer the voice and say, "I'm late for class. I can't go in right now." So I never did go in. And so it was through the Bridge of Freedom that I found this activity in Boston. The head of it was the doctor, the very one who used to go to that second-hand bookstore. His name was Dr. Whitney, and by that time he was an elderly man. I wasn't intended to come into the knowledge of the Ascended Master's activities through the Bridge to Freedom, but that is how God worked by grace to save me from my not following that inner direction. Once I made contact with Dr. Whitney, I would never leave him alone. His office was between my apartment and Boston University. I would stop there on my way to and from class and wait in his waiting room. When all other patients were done, he would take me in and I would ask him questions, and he would answer all of them patiently until I had no more. Then I would go home and read the teachings of the masters, and I will come back the next day, wait in the waiting room, and ask more questions. Sometimes I would have to wait an hour or two until the patients were through before I could ask him more questions. Mr. Whitney was a lovely person. He had a small room where he held his meetings. At each meetings and each decree session, he would bank the entire altar with fresh flowers, and the whole room would have a wonderful fragrance. He had many friends who were part of the group. Some of them were quite elderly. In order to fill his meetings, he would have to go out in his car and drive from his house to house around the city to collect all these dear people, chauffeur them to the meeting, escort them up, and sit them down. And when the meeting was over, he would chauffeur them all home again, which he gladly did in order to have a meeting. I attended services at Dr. Whitney's while working at the mother church, being married, and going to school. In April 1961, I was reading in the newspaper about events in Cuba and the Caribbean. It was a key turning point, and I could see the possibility of communism spreading through the whole hemisphere. I wept and wept and wept when I read the newspaper. It was the most terrible day of my life. There I was weeping, and Doug came home, and in the tradition of Christian Science, he said, "What are you crying about? It's not real." People in Christian Science circles tend to think that just about everything is not real. Error is not real. Matter is not real. Nothing that's unpleasant is real, and they cease to deal realistically with life. That's not the way Mary Baker Eddy was, but that is how some of her followers have become. So there he was. That was as much accountability as he was going to take for the world sin. I was taking responsibility. The Caribbean was my problem. What was I going to do about it? That's how I looked at it. I knew that Saint Germain had the answers. I was desperate. I could feel the decades turning, and I could feel that there was imminent danger. I felt that finding Saint Germain was going to be the key to understanding the new age that was dawning upon us, and yet I wasn't any nearer to finding him or his teaching. So I leaped from my seat and ran up a couple of flights of stairs to the roof of my apartment. I threw my arms up into the blue sky and the billowing clouds, and I cried into the sky, "Saint Germain, I know you're up there. You've got to come and get me now. I cannot wait any longer." I was demanding and I was fearless, and I felt the light and love go out from me, and I felt it reach its mark. I knew he was there, and I was at peace. Less than a week after making that fiat, I received a phone call from Dr. Whitney telling me that the messenger Mark Prophet would be in town that evening, and he would deliver a lecture and a dictation. I was thrilled. I had to be there, and I had to meet this messenger. After all of these years trying to find Godfrey Ray King to no avail, I had to hear a dictation. I literally ran to this meeting. I was so excited and I wanted to be on time. My heart was pounding. I just couldn't believe it. I was finally going to meet the messenger of the ascended masters.